Roger, Roger. So you're running a 3-band compressor?
That's right. That it's all built into the software.
Roger, Roger. Well, that's probably one of the more interesting compression operations, because it's much more transparent than just a normal full frequency compressor.
Yeah, because you don't hear any of the pumping. If you're just trying to do everything in one single band, then on low frequencies will cause a pumping sound. It'll vary the loudness of the higher frequencies when it shouldn't. Over.
Oh, roger that. Yeah, I just sometimes prefer, well, just in normal situations, to use a limiter at about 2 or 3 dB of limiting. There's, the limiter is such a fast attack and release time that you can't even hear it working, Roger.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, if you happen to be listening to any of those stations, you can give me some feedback later on if you noticed anything. All these things are happening, but 99% of the listeners don't notice it.
Roger. Now, Ted, I just got my QSO vlog recorder up, and I want you to mention those 3 entities that you are programming.
Oh, okay. If you go up to look me up on QRZ, you'll see my links, URLs on QRZ.com. But it's classical-oasis.com. It's jazz-oasis.com, and the third one is just Dixieland.website. Over.
Roger, Roger. And this I'm speaking with Ted, Kilo Charlie 3 OL. And Ted, where were you?
In Lawrence, Kansas.
That's right. That's right. We were talking about some of our younger days, much younger days, and we were discussing a certain tube that we had as a child that made a pirate radio station possible with one tube, a 117L7, and I'd never heard anybody else mention that tube before, except when I started talking with Ted here just a minute ago, and he had one of those tubes as a kid also. So this was like in a little box, and the box mine had holes in it, and you could actually see the tube glowing inside. There was a possible health danger in that 117L7 was a direct AC filament tube. There was no 6 volts or 12 volts for the filaments. It was just straight AC, and there was no isolation transformer in there. So you had to be, pretty careful when you set it up. But it sure did get out. Now, Ted, maybe he didn't have the best antenna or such, but I had a 300-foot long wire antenna coming out of a tree to mine, and I got, I guess, about 15 miles out of it. The guy that had it was in the military, and he gave it to my mother for me, and he said to be sure, and he said 2 things: be sure and keep an antenna on it, otherwise it would burn up, and also not to operate it on the same frequency as the local radio stations. He said because I would probably get in trouble. So there you go. Back to you, Ted.
Yeah, KC9VKV from KC3OL. I think when I had that, I was still living in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And then a year after that, when I was 13, moved to Miami, Florida. And when I was 14, I got my novice license. And I remember my very first novice rig that I built was an 807 crystal oscillator that I used on 80 meters. Over.
Roger, Roger. Now, you mentioned Florida. My hometown was West Palm Beach. Was your hometown in Florida?
It was Miami, and my call sign back in the early 50s was K4ANW.
What was your unlicensed pirate radio station call sign?
Oh, I can't remember that. It's too far away. I don't even think I used a call sign. I was just over there blabbering on it.
Roger. I had two, WDTR and what was that other one? K something. But I had both the W's and the K's covered.
Yeah, what was your call sign in West Palm Beach?
As an amateur?
Yeah.
I wasn't. I didn't get to be an amateur radio operator until after I retired 50 years in broadcasting, Roger.
And what years were you in West Palm Beach?
Oh, this would be 1956, 57.
56 and 57. I was at Coral Gables High School.
Roger, Roger. Your favorite radio station was WFUN.
Well, how did you know? Hey, I can tell you, you're absolutely right. But I can tell you a lot about all of the stations down there at the time on AM. By the way, I want to tell you about WINZ. You ready for this story?
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, that was a 50,000 watt station, and when I tell people about WINZ, they shake their head and like, oh no. First of all, this is the truth. WINZ 50,000 watt station. There were no transformers. True or false?
Well, I don't know. I mean, you mean power transformers or what?
Yes.
I would think there would be.
Negative. The whole thing was run off of alternators.
What was the reasoning for that?
Beats the hell out of me. Final amplifier was called a Doherty amplifier, DOHERTY. Over.
Okay, that's low-level modulation, isn't it?
Yeah. The driver stage was Heising modulation. Was Heising modulated the driver stage and fed that into a Doherty amplifier.
Roger. They probably should have left the Doherty off and just ran it as Heising. What was the drive power?
Oh God, I've forgotten that. But I got a tour of the station back in the 50s, and I really laughed. The chief engineer out there wore a pith helmet with a 1N34 diode and an earpiece built into the pith helmet. And he, of course, no matter where he was listening to the station. Over.
Roger. Well, and was he using the pith helmet for possible debris falling out of the sky as the Doherty system blew up?
I don't know. And then, of course, I remember WIOD is another one of the AM stations on there, which had its antennas right out in the water, in the Bay Area. Over.
Roger, Roger. Now, you must have been a sophisticate. I mean, I would think your next station would have been WQAM.
It was. WQAM was down on 560 kilohertz. They were the big competition for WFUN.
Oh, that's it, Roger. I used to listen to both those stations up in West Palm. I could get QAM a lot better than FUN, but I just, as a kid, actually, I must admit that WQAM was my inspiration for becoming a radio person, because, I would listen to them and they were always so tight. I just couldn't imagine how one human could possibly be as tight as they were, and I almost came to the conclusion that they were actually recorded pieces, and they were playing them as live, but they were live, but they were really tight.
KC9VKV, this is KC3OL. WFUN was my favorite, partly because one of the key disc jockeys on FUN was a ham operator, and we used to talk to him regularly when he wasn't on the air.
Roger, who was that?
I can't remember his name anymore.
I knew one guy. I met this guy called Chris Edwards. Well, I was working at WJNO in West Palm Beach, and I had worked at WHEW in Riviera Beach, and he came in to the station one evening, and we got to talking, and he was working at WHEW where I had worked, and his goal was to make it to WQAM, and or WFUN, I'm sorry, and it wasn't, I couldn't imagine somebody that would camp out in West Palm Beach waiting for an opening at a radio station 65 miles away or so, but he did, and eventually, I think it was FUN, Roger?
Boy, Chris, you know that name, Chris Edwards, does sound quite familiar. Well, let me tell you something else then from Florida in the 50s. My mother had a TV show during that period of time. And my mother, it was a puppet show that was on, what was it called? Let me see, I'll get these call signs mixed up. WTCN, over.
No, I'm not familiar with that. I didn't watch a lot of TV as a kid, Roger.
I'm sorry, WTVJ. So I used to be down at every single Sunday I would be down at the TV station for about 4 hours because I was always helping my mother do her puppet show. So can you imagine a 15-year-old, 16-year-old kid wandering around in a TV station like me that had all these questions and wanted to learn everything over?
Roger that. And I do recall WTVJ. That was Channel 4, I think.
Yeah, that's it. And so we're down there for a month to do my mother's puppet show, you know, and but she also was on some of the early network. She was on Arthur Godfrey, for example. She was on the Today Show. Remember Dave Garroway was the guy that ran the Today Show. Remember that?
Oh, yeah. Now, just out of curiosity, what was her age when she was doing the WTVJ show?
Started doing. She started doing that when we still lived in Minneapolis. So I was 11 years old when we started doing it in 1940. See, I'm 80 now, so 1949. I was 11 years old, and we moved to Miami at 1956. Well, I guess I was about 18 years old. Over.
Now wait a minute. You're not 80, are you?
Yeah, unfortunately.
Gosh, you sound like about 22. Oh,
is that good or bad?
Well, that's good. I mean, otherwise, it's. I'm amazed. I'm 70, somewhere around 70 something.
You forgot, huh?
Well, that's the first thing that happens when you get older. You forget a lot of stuff. You go into a room and say, "Hey, why am I here?"
Hey, you know what? I don't usually have physical problems, but yesterday, and it still hurts today, I pulled a muscle in my back. I guess it's a muscle. And I went to see a chiropractor yesterday for the first time in many years.
Roger. Now, that's interesting because, the problem is as you get older, your body takes longer to heal. And what would take a couple of weeks as a youngster, it takes a couple of months at least when you get older to heal, Roger.
Yeah, it does. And I go to the health club every other day and work out on the treadmill, on the bicycles, in the weight room and all that stuff. And I don't really enjoy that. I just figure it's necessary at our age to do that.
Roger, I have enough stuff around the house that keeps me fairly limber. The thing is, when you get older, you have to be very careful not to take any falls because, you can, if you break a hip or something, man, that's pretty dangerous.
Yeah, I've never, I had to quit roller skating 10 years ago when I was 70. That was the last time I've been in a roller rink.
Roger, I used to ride a bike every morning for about 2 hours in a nearby park around a lake. And the lake was, they had a pedway around the lake, which was just over a mile long. And so I'd ride for a couple of hours, and I really liked that, except once somebody had parked in the main entrance to the park. So I had to seek an alternate route, and that alternate route led me to an area where I had to, where those concrete jobbers are for the cars, where they can't go any further. They define the end of the or the front of the parking space. Well, I was resting on one of those. Do a lot of resting when I'm riding, but I was resting on one of those, and my the bike just kind of tipped sideways just a little bit. And I went to put my foot out to catch myself, and my the pedal on the bike had a raised piece of metal on the end of the pedal to keep your foot from sliding off. And I was trying to slide my foot off to brace myself, and I couldn't get my foot loose from the pedal, and I just went right over. And I mean, most embarrassing situation, you know. It took me a minute or so to figure out if I was still in one piece, and then another minute to look around to see who might have seen me, Roger.
Yeah, I'm still bike riding. Not a lot, but I am still bike riding. And I have the bike I have now is a Trek, about a 24-pound aluminum type bike. But I know my balance is not as good as it used to be. And by the way, I've been on motorcycles all my life. I quit those 10 years ago also. Last motorcycle I owned was in 1970. I figured I'd used up my 9 lives. Over.
Oh, Roger, boy, that can really take you out in a flash. I mean, and not necessarily your fault, you know. I mean, just in general, it's a real dangerous means of transportation, I think, Roger.
Yeah. By the way, I was just thinking of ham splits. This is before your time in ham radio, but back in West Palm Beach, Florida, there used to be an old-timer back in the 50s. And I think it's called W4JQ. But then, I know that won't ring a bell for you there. You know, something else, by the way. I was going to name some of the AM radio stations that we used to listen to that were out of state. You remember some of those?
Oh, yeah. I used to listen to WGN all the time. McCormick, Franklin McCormick, After Midnight was a great inspiration. I mean, he had the whatever's to actually do some poetry at night, you know, from time to time. And I thought that was tremendously brave of him to do that, you know. And he was another inspiration of mine. Then there was like WSB. And then Atlanta, let's see, what was the Atlanta station? I guess it was WSB Atlanta.
Okay, yeah, there's one in particular here. I'm going to think of it here. I'm going to cheat here and look it up. There was one station that used to play rhythm and blues back in the 50s. That's all they did was rhythm and blues, and they were in the southeast part of the United States, not Florida, not Georgia, somewhere above that. And I'm going to look them up. I know you're going to know the station I'm talking about.
Oh yeah, it's WLAC. Now that's interesting. You know, both WLAC and SM are in Nashville, but in the beginning they both were like good music stations in the daytime. I worked at Reno Radio outside of Nashville when I was 16. I was a board op for they would do remotes on the weekend, and I would at 16 I'd do board ops for the remotes. And they had a really interesting system for FM links. They had a couple of Volkswagens, and they had directional antennas. And so I learned all about how to peak antennas. You know, they would go out on a remote, and they would bring their antenna up a little bit, fire it up, and I would take the station antenna and find them and zero in for max smoke, and then I would hold one and they would go and zing around and find my max smoke, and pretty soon, you know, we could work 20 miles away or so, Class A signal with you know, only about 15 watts, Roger.
Okay, yeah, WLAC, that's it, WLAC. They used to have a pretty nice signal down in Miami. I was always impressed with that. And by the way, in the 50s, I never did very much for any stations, but I was on call because I had a first phone when I was a kid.
Roger that. Now that if you had pursued a broadcast career, that would have first phone would have helped you a great deal, Roger.
Oh, it helped me a lot. That's how I got it. My whole career was started by that because when I was just 1956, I started working for Pan American Airlines in avionics, and showing them that first phone is what got me my job. Over.
Oh, Roger, Roger. Now tell me about that. You're talking about commercial aircraft?
Yeah. I was working for Pan American as an avionics technician in 1956. I was the company's youngest employee.
Roger that. Okay, I had contact with a aeronautical mobile that was coming down from Canada, going towards Mexico, and he was passing off to my west, about 120 miles or so, and I had a good copy on him coming in for about 15 minutes. Now they were tooling along. This was a commercial jet. I guess they were tooling along at about 200 and something miles an hour, and we were talking, and he was talking about his antenna was in the wing of the airplane, and I was wondering, would that be longwise perpendicular to the aircraft?
They just had tailing wires, the ones I remember, but yeah, Pan Am didn't do any of those when I was there. They didn't have any trailing wires, but I know some airplanes did use trailing wires. Go ahead.
Roger. No, this was not a trailing wire. This was antenna, HF antenna in the wing. Roger, in the main wing.
I can't remember. I can't remember how they did it. I remember. Let me stop and think. Oh! Wait a minute. I know what they were doing then. Yeah, the DC-4s were doing it. They have a wire from the tip of the aileron back up to just above the top of the fuselage. Over.
Oh, Roger. Well, he kind of died out a little bit when he got directly west of me. So I'm assuming that wire was, perpendicular to the aircraft. And then as he moved on down, he went. I think he went down to Nashville and hung a right to Mexico. And after he got directly west of me, the signal started coming up again till he hit Nashville, and then when he took his right, we lost him there,
I remember doing way back, this is in the 60s, not the 50s. Back in the 60s, as a passenger on some of these flights, it would be fun to take a walkie-talkie and get in the back of the airplane and get up right next to a window and work 300 miles contact with your 2-meter walkie-talkie. Over.
Oh, Roger. It reminds me of this guy that used to fly, loved to fly, and he would sometimes take his lunch break and go to the airport and go flying. And this one time he took a little TV set with him when he went flying, and I guess he was at about 3,000 feet or so, 4,000, probably lower than that, 3,000 or so. And he fired up that TV, and he was on UHF. And he said, this was one of those older TVs with a rotary frequency selector, channel selector, not a clicker, but just a rotary veneer kind of tuner. And he said every as he turned it, there was just a TV station every way. There was never a time that he turned that dial that there wasn't a new TV station. So I'm thinking, wow, that's right. At those altitudes, if you could figure out a way to send your signal straight up 3,000 feet and then broaden out, take a 90, you could communicate for hundreds and hundreds of miles, and all you got to do is transmit 3,000 feet.
Okay, KC9VKV, KC3OL. Actually, I have one of my websites. I have many here. I have a website that's dedicated to Florida hams from the 60s. What year did you get your license?
Oh, like I said, this was I got my license after a 50-year broadcast career, so I've only been licensed for probably about 6 years, 6 or 7 years, 5 or 6 years, somewhere in there. It was, after I had retired, Roger.
Okay, I could send you a link with a bunch of hams that were my friends in Florida during the 60s, but that wouldn't ring a bell, would it?
No, when I was in Florida, I hadn't even really actually thought about being a ham radio operator. Probably it was some 15 years later. I left West Palm in 1967. I went to Fayetteville, Fort Bragg, not in the military, but in commercial radio operation. 2 stations there, WFLB and WFBS. And probably in 1970, I came to Louisville, and I started thinking about, I was probably into CB at that time, started going into CB and started really thinking about being an amateur radio operator. What prevented me from being an amateur radio operator for many, many years was, the requirements for the code, because I just could not grasp the code, and I knew I couldn't, so I didn't, I said, well, I'll be a CBer. So, therefore, a few years I was a CBer, and I was working at a 50,000 watt clear channel station, when the clear channel used to mean something before the current clear channel stations, say no more. But I wound up doing some servicing for Radio Shack. I would drop by, Radio Shack, and picked up a bunch of stuff that had been, returned for in operation, and I would take it home and fix it. And I ran across a couple of CB radios that, for some mysterious reason, just could not be fixed. And so I wound up with those, and that was my beginning into CB. And then later on, though, after I retired from HAS, I did think about being an amateur radio operator again, and by that time the FCC had decided that the code was no longer required, so it all worked out.
Now, listen, you just reminded me of something. I watched a movie just a few days ago that I'd seen originally. You just got to put this on your to-do list. It was a Robin Williams movie called Good Morning Vietnam. Good Morning Vietnam. Over.
Oh yeah, I'm familiar with that movie, Roger.
That was fun to see that again after all those years. Where he shows up as a disc jockey in Saigon, and of course a lot of the people that he was working for couldn't get used to his style of broadcasting. Go ahead.
Roger. Have you ever catch, I think it was Captain Dave on, what was that, 3843?
No, 3843, no, tell me about Captain Dave. Who is he?
Well, Captain Dave had a lot of, let's see, in his younger days he did a lot of very creative stuff in TV and radio, and then later on he was an amateur radio operator, and I guess he did time in Vietnam. He had a lot of flashbacks on the air, provoked, I think, in some degree by Jack Daniels, but he was on, 3843, a landmark on 3843, and very much a thorn in the FCC's back until they finally, after many years, took him down recently, I think.
Oh yeah, I'm familiar with the type because back in the 70s or 80s. WA4D was one of those types. I'm trying to think of WA4D's name here. It'll probably come in a second. A real troublemaker, you could call him. But also, there's somebody right now that's hanging out on 7200. Intermittently during the day, you'll hear this character on 7200, and his call sign is K9RSY. Super lid, over.
Oh, now, Don. Was it Don? Hang on. Dan, that's right. Now, 7200 is a very unusual frequency. A lot of folks gravitate on that, and sometimes that channel can be very, very interesting. One thing about it, it is where a lot of folks wind up, at least on that frequency, which frees up the rest of the band to not have problems, Roger.
Yeah, exactly. It actually kind of amazes me that people like Dan can last so long on the air because, but I guess he's not breaking any laws. He's very, very foul language, but then on commercial broadcasting you hear the same kind of foul language, over.
Well, now speak for today. When I came up, man, you did not have foul language. You might get away with some double entendre, but you had your choice of words that you had to be careful about, Roger.
Yeah. But I noticed that he's kind of replaced WA4D, and WA4D has replaced KI4. The guy you're talking about, Captain Dave, is KI4THY.
Roger, Ted, I kind of lose you when you pull off mic there a little bit.
Yeah, KI4THY is Captain Dave.
Oh, that's a Roger. And is that a current release about him, or I never knew for sure what happened. I assumed that he got persuaded by the FCC one way or the other to not transmit at night, but I never heard for sure, Roger.
I don't know the story about him. I just looked him up when we were talking. He's on YouTube, and if you just do a search for him on your on Google it, just do Captain Dave 3843, and it'll bring up a couple of YouTube videos about him. In fact, I've got one up on the screen right now, over.
Roger. I've got two of them on him myself.
I think you turn right around, 180 degrees, and get on my jeans and a heavy shirt. So I'm here, KI4THY.
Now you can hear him in the background, over.
Roger. Now he used to get a problem with the liquid intake, and he had a bunch of AFRS Vietnam audio tapes that he would play for sometimes like half an hour. These were the Armed Forces Radio service out of Vietnam.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we're back to Robin Williams' Good Morning Vietnam.
Roger. I figure it was he was going through some kind of flashback there, So he would, and occasionally he would say, I forget what his expression was, something like right on or something like that. He would say in the background as this tape's playing, different music and stuff.
And by the way, I actually was in Vietnam in 1968. I was a civilian. I worked for Pan American Airlines in Saigon. I was in charge of taking care of the communications between the airport and the city.
Roger. Now, come clean. You were a CIA operative, Roger.
No, not really. But what happened was Pan Am was doing what they call R&R flights, rest and recreation flights from Saigon to Bangkok, Thailand, and Singapore, and that was a whole deal. And I was involved in that program. Go ahead.
Roger that. Well, I mean, that was Probably one of the most dangerous places in the world, Roger.
Well, you know, I tell you, I'm going to sign off in a minute here, but I had to work in the terminal building at the airport at times. It was called Thompson Airport, and we were always worried about somebody walking in there with some luggage, right in the middle of the terminal, putting the luggage down, and then walking out. Because the reason why we were worried about luggage that was not accompanied by a person was claymore mines. Over.
Oh, Roger, Roger. Well, now with ISIS, you don't even have the clue of them, you know, unattended luggage. These guys go with the luggage, Roger, and pull the plug themselves.
Yeah, that's even worse. That's even worse. So, fortunately, we didn't have a claymore mine go off in the Thompson terminal, at least while I was there, but we always were concerned about that, and they had security people keeping their eye on anybody to make sure that they didn't put their suitcase on and walk away. Over.
Oh, Roger that, and also submachine guns and stuff like that. Boy, they just Saigon was kind of an old Western type heyday city, wasn't it?
You know what? Here's what gets me about Saigon. Life goes on. You could say I could wander around in Saigon and you see people just at their restaurants and their stores just carrying on like there wasn't any war at all.
Roger, Roger. Well, listen, Ted, I really enjoyed it. Let me tell you, if you go to YouTube and do a call letter search for Kilo Charlie 9, Victor Kilo Victor, that'll take you to our QSO page on YouTube. And on that page somewhere, I'll have our QSO posted on that, and I'll probably be able to post it up to YouTube in the next couple of days, Roger.
Okay, I have about 35 different videos on YouTube, but you have to look up my name. So go to YouTube and put my full name in, and you'll see our travels. Go ahead.
Roger, sir, I'll do that. So I'll say 3s for now, and like I say, if you, you know, you were a lot stronger there initially, and the kind of conditions kind of changed around a little bit. So anyway, but you have been copyable 99% of the time, and so I'll say 3s, and like I say, if you go to YouTube and do that call letter search, that'll bring up our QSO vlog. So 3s for now, and we'll catch you later.
Okay. Oh, by the way, I discovered you can put my call sign into YouTube. That works too. Yeah, put my call sign in there. You'll see about 40 different videos of travels all over the world. 73, enjoyed it, and we'll look for you again on here. KC9VKV, Jim. This is KC3OL, clear.